Hi there, my name is Anika Bukapatnam, and I am back with episode 7 of 15 Questions with a Feminist. Question number 1. What is your name and what is your role in the menstrual movement?
My name is Anjali Mehrotra, and I would say my role is that of an activist or an advocate, really a champion. I've been working since 2019 on really menstrual equity in New Jersey, but also championing it through my national now organization. So I would say that's what my role is.
Perfect. And would you be able to describe your first experience in the menstrual activism space?
Sure. So in 2019, I was elected president of the National Organization for Women of New Jersey. And one of the first things I did was I actually sent out a survey to our members asking what are some of the issues that they would like us to address in New Jersey. And this came up as one of the issues. And at that point, there was one bill in New Jersey that was pending, which was a bill to provide menstrual products for girls for students, for public school students in the bathrooms. And since then, I started working on it, started the coalition. And since then, I think we're up in New Jersey now. There's upwards of 20 bills that are pending. So we have definitely seen this movement really move. But that's where I started working.
Great. Please describe the biggest challenge that you personally have faced so far in this journey.
I think that's a real loaded question, to be honest with you. I think my biggest challenge has been, unfortunately, in the women's movement in general, in the feminist spaces in general, is that you come to a woke feminist space and you expect a certain level of, I think, respect, a certain level of, feeling of community and of being included and having that sense of like true inclusion for diversity. And my personal experience has not been that. I have found, unfortunately, there's too much of gatekeeping. There are power structures where, unfortunately, controlled by white women, even in the progressive feminist spaces, who do not want to give up power. And that has been a significant roadblock, not just on this work, on this bill, but in sort of all the work that I do for women's rights.
Okay, and similar but a lot more general, what do you think is the biggest problem preventing menstrual equity throughout the space?
I would say for the actual menstrual movement is it's lack of awareness.
Okay.
I think once you talk to somebody and you make them aware of the issue, they're like, of course, like, this is a no-brainer, we should be doing this. But this is a topic that nobody wants to talk about. There's a lot of stigma. In a lot of cultures, it is taboo. And I think for that reason, even in the United States, most men are not even aware of what the issue is or what it actually entails to get your period. They definitely don't want to talk about it.
Yeah.
So I think that stigma and that lack of awareness is a big problem in this movement. And, we are working really hard that everywhere we go, all the work we do, to really treat this as what it is. It's a normal condition. It's a normal biological function that should get the same attention and treatment as any other.
Definitely. I'm going to proceed to ask you some more niche questions targeted to the work that you as an activist have been doing currently. So, how is social justice an interdisciplinary effort?
So now, which is the other organization that I am affiliated with pretty closely, I was for almost 4 years president of Now New Jersey. I am still on the National Now board. One of the things that we always talk about is that we want our feminist work to be intersectional and anti-racist. We believe that it's really important to recognize that there are multiple levels of oppression, and a lot of times that these collide based on the different identities that you may be part of. So if you are, for example, a Black woman, or if you are a queer woman, you face, not only do you face like whatever is heaped onto women in general, the general misogyny, but then you're also dealing with the face of the racism or the homophobia and the way that that may be experienced by a male in their space. So a Black man facing racism is going to be different from a woman facing it. So, and that is really that intersection of race and gender. And whether it's, sexual orientation, whether it is, um, we see that with trans people. It's really important to recognize that these multiple identities can really work in a very sort of, like an intersection manner in the oppression that you face.
Yeah.
So I think in any work that you do, I'm a big believer of bringing in the voices of those who are impacted. So when you're talking about a coalition, we have organizations like mine that bring skills in terms of, how to lobby legislators or how to, we actually have relationships with certain legislators, right? But then there are people who are doing this work on the ground. We have a number of organizations that actually collect and distribute product, for example, that are more working with the people that are on the ground. And so they have the experience of those who are impacted directly, and so they can speak to their experiences. It's also, we also work, for example, with, LGBTQ organizations. And for this bill in particular, there was some concern with the way the bill was originally worded. It had us asking for placement of product in all bathrooms, both genders in the schools. And there were some concerns expressed in the Senate Education Committee over that. And we were able to actually go back to some of our organizations like Gardens of Equality and talk to some parents who actually have students that are experiencing their transition while they are in middle school, and even talk to students who are actually in middle school and transitioning to see what felt safe for them. And I mean, it was kind of like a learning experience for us. Like we were proposing that it should be put in male bathrooms, and they came back to us and said, actually, that's not a safe space for us. As a student, a middle school student who is transitioning, but still menstruating and they're presenting male, they're not going to feel safe going into a men's bathroom when they have their period. So that was, I think that really highlighted for me why it's really important to include the voices of everybody, and especially those who are impacted. And I think that's what you're able to do in a coalition, have these multiple voices and multiple skill levels.
Definitely. So, in what ways has the current scheme of politics affected efforts to achieve menstrual equity? Why has there been so much resistance or inertia to do something that would help so many people?
So I think a lack of awareness. I think once we talk to people, there's very few people who don't recognize it as a need. Sometimes it's just a question of priority. I think especially at the state level, each state has a very different and unique way that their legislature operates. Some states are part-time, some states only do it like once every 2 years. I think that has been an overall pattern throughout the country why it has taken time. But in New Jersey itself, I would say that it's not that there is, that they don't recognize the need. I think it's a question of priority in the sense that there's just like so much need, especially in a pandemic where they had to first deal with like real health needs on the ground, right? Like just taking care of like vaccines. You had to deal with people losing their jobs. So unemployment was a big thing. And then you have to deal with education and how are we going to make schools safe first for the pandemic. And then we're dealing with issues of like learning loss and all of this. There's just so many things I think that we're experiencing in the last couple of years that I've been working on the bill. So everybody I've talked to, it's not that they don't understand the need or they're not behind the bill. It's really become a case of like, well, I have these that are sort of more pressing priorities that I need to take care of first. But we're really glad that we're getting this attention now.
Definitely. As a high schooler right now, like I definitely see some of the fallout of these few years. Um, so how is period poverty a community issue, including people who do not necessarily menstruate?
To me, it goes back to that, if we're not all equal, then none of us are equal, right? So I think I am a big believer that even as I work for women's rights and I work for all of these issues that primarily affect women, if we're not going to bring 50% of the population along with us, we're never going to get anything done, right? So I think it's just as important to educate those people and say, hey, this is what is going on in your backyard. This is what is probably going on with the women in your household. Like, do you know that this is an issue? So I think that is why I think everything is a community issue, any major issue, any problem, especially. And this one, especially, I think it's one of those things also that people don't realize, how little it costs and what a big difference it makes once you do it. I always like to think of, like, in my particular town, in my community, right? One of the things that is a big issue is bulk pickup. We don't have bulk pickup. And there are the residents who like it and want it. And then there are other residents who are like, why do I want that? Why would I want that? My taxes are going to go up as a result for something I'm never going to use. And what I've come to realize is that probably every house in this town is collecting junk in its basement, which if they had bulk pickup, they would have gotten rid of long ago.
Yeah, yeah,
So I think sometimes it's like that, like you don't know that you need these products in the bathroom until you have them,
yeah.
right?
That's a very
And
good
it can be
analogy.
like sort of life changing, and then it's like that aha moment, like of course, like this should have been done long ago.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh, I really like that analogy, and I do think I'll use it in the future. Um, so we have talked about the bill to get period products in school bathrooms. Would you be able to elaborate on its current progress right now?
So actually, I have really, really exciting news today. So our bill was actually just posted for a full Senate vote for Monday. So this has been a long process, probably longer when I look back on it than I realized when I first started on this. This bill, I believe, was first introduced in 2018. And when I started working on 2019, I was frankly not happy with the way the bill looked. It had a lot of shortcomings. I did not like the use of the term feminine hygiene. I felt like it needed a gender neutral, scientific, accurate word, something like either period products or menstrual products, even better. And the initial partners who had sort of written the bill, also the legislators, like really balked when I asked them to change that. Like there was definitely like, why? So I had to like bring them along on the journey and be like, no, like this is why we can't use that language. Also, initially the bill was written to only apply to certain school districts where they met certain economic criteria for poverty amongst their residents. And we really felt that it was important that we expanded to all schools in New Jersey, all school districts. So those are some of the things that we were able to, I guess, get buy-in orally, but it wasn't in the bill until very recently.
Wow, that's really good.
So even though they said yes to the amendments that we were asking for, because we weren't getting any hearings, they weren't actually in the bill. So it was only in June that they started actually putting in amendments that we asked for.
Wow.
So we got all school districts added. We got the word, menstrual to replace feminine hygiene. And then this latest version that we have, we got everything else that we asked for. We asked them to include non-gender bathrooms. That was included. We asked them to look at K through 5 schools. They put in a provision to ask the DOE to evaluate what the need would be in K through 5 schools. We also asked to include a lot of findings language, which we have learned is important because at some point later on, when you look at bills, there's one thing about what the legislature actually does, but the intention can be important if it is ever challenged by somebody. What was the legislator's intention? Why did they do this? So the findings language actually gives you the intent behind the bill. And we got a lot of findings language that we sent to them, something like 7 or 8 paragraphs added to the bill.
Wow. Wow. Yeah.
So that was really exciting for us, and that was only last week. So we had a hearing at the Senate Budget and Hearings, Senate Budget and Appropriations Committee. And frankly, I knew that the reason it was posted was it was probably going to pass, but I went in prepared for like a lot of questions about the cost, because in my past conversations with legislators, especially Republicans, that has been like sort of one sticking point. How much is this going to cost? Why is it going to cost so much? And I went in with like all the data and everything prepared to be asked those questions, and they never came up.
Okay.
And we got a 12-0 unanimous vote out of committee. So that was really exciting that it was a bipartisan vote. And the bill is now up for a full Senate vote on Monday, which is very exciting.
I'm excited to see where it goes. Yeah.
Which I would say if you can be there, you should come.
Definitely, I'll try. And for our question number 9, how has being creative helped you out in this space? In what ways have you had to think outside the box or do something a little differently than you would have?
So I am very big about messaging, right? And I think it's one thing to have talking points. It's another thing to find a way to convince an audience. And sometimes, and I would say I'm very good at also reading the room and recognizing when I need to switch my talking points and how can I get across to this person. And honestly, like, I think that has really helped me get my point across on this bill. So not only providing some general talking points, but in speaking to audiences. I remember it was March of this year, I was speaking for the Junior League of Monmouth County at a symposium that they did on menstrual equity. And we had somebody on the panel who was a pediatrician. He was a Black man, obviously not really for this issue. And he kept insisting that, he told his daughters to always be prepared. And he didn't really see any reason why this should be, like, he understood the idea of period poverty. And he said, sure, if somebody can't afford it, we should make it accessible to them. But he didn't understand that why should it be available in every bathroom for any woman to use? Like, why can't they just bring their own? And, and I had already had like a pre-meeting with him, and I knew sort of some of his stances and how ridiculous, frankly, they were. So when I was there on the panel and I was in a room full of women, the audience was primarily women, I asked the question that I would say that all of the women here are educated, they probably consider themselves fairly organized. How many of you have been caught without having a period product when you got your period at some point in your life, right? And every single hand went up.
Wow. And
truly the man was like, oh, wow. Like, it was like, he did not expect that at all. And there was no better way to get that point across to him. That this is not about being organized. This is not about being educated. This is not about being affluent. There is no way to be 100% prepared for this because there are so many variables, and you cannot explain that to somebody who does not menstruate.
Yeah. That's a very good point. Yeah. How has your identity shaped your interest and work in this space?
So I think for my identity, I definitely bring all the taboo and stigma with me. I was born and raised in India, and growing up, there were all these rules about what you could and could not do when you were menstruating. We were not allowed to go to the kitchen. We weren't allowed to touch the refrigerator in the house. We weren't allowed to go to the temple. Like, there were a lot of rules, right? And so I know where so much of this comes from. I also know of all the sort of stigma because I remember I went to an all-girls school and our uniform was white. And there would be days when girls would, get their period unexpectedly and stain their uniform. And because they were ashamed of walking on the street with a stained uniform, they would actually, we had like real pens, fountain pens with like a real ink in them. They would actually take that ink and blot it on their dress so that they would have a big ink spot rather than have a red spot. So it's also really interesting to me to see how many South Asians, especially Indian women, are involved in this movement. Like when I look at all the examples of women who have really become notorious, from like a Rupi Kaur to the woman in the UK who ran the marathon by, while she was free bleeding, I'm struck by how many of them are Indian women. And I think it's amazing that they are trying to take all that stigma and taboos that they were taught in their culture and really sort of be like almost like the standard bearers of this movement. I don't know if you've seen it. One of the taboos that they have in India is they say you can't touch, like every home used to make, when I was growing up, we used to make our own pickles. And you were not allowed to touch the pickle jar because God forbid, if you had your period, all the pickle in it was going to go bad.
I've heard
right?
stories, yeah.
And I forget what brand it is, but there is a brand of sanitary napkins in India that has launched a campaign called I Touch the Pickle.
Oh.
And the video is amazing. It's like this young girl, her grandmother's watching her, and she goes and she touches the pickle jar and she's like, look, I touched the pickle and nothing happened. Like, I think it's really great that there is this real movement in some of those places which had the worst sort of taboos and stigma to change that.
Yeah, definitely. And for any young person, any person watching this, how can they get involved and influence their community?
So I always say that the menstrual equity movement is a great starter advocacy issue. And the reason I say that is because you literally could take this issue and do it at whatever scale you want to do it, right? So if you are a high school student, you could ask your local school to carry them the products in the school. And if that's too difficult, you could just go to the local library and say, hey, can we put products here? You can go to your local township, municipal building and say, hey, can we put these products in the bathrooms, right? You can obviously do the, the collection and distribution, but that to me is not advocacy. It's more of, I would say, like a social justice work, right? Like when you're actually just trying to help those in need. But in terms of advocacy, I feel like there are so many levels that you can do this at. You could do it at a very local level. If you want to go one step higher, you could go to like your county, right? And say, hey, why don't you start carrying these products in your courthouse bathrooms or in your, county buildings, which is something that we're trying to do in New Jersey right now with some of the counties. You could also then go to where we are at the state legislature. And if you're a national organization, then you can fight for a federal bill. There's also things like the tampon tax. There are organizations now that are fighting to, remove that on every state, because that is something that is a state level tax. So there are just so many levels that you can do it at.
Yeah.
One of the other things that I tried to get started in New Jersey, we're so hopeful, is, starting a program where we get petitions to talk to ShopRite. Hey, can we change that sign from feminine hygiene to menstrual?
Yeah. It's definitely like in the little things, right?
Right. Yeah. So there are so many different ways and levels and sort of scales that you can advocate for this issue, that I think it's a great beginner issue for advocacy. And, doing all of these things, whether you're doing lobbying for legislation, you're organizing a petition drive, you're going and talking to your local officials, right? You are building the skills that you can bring to some other issue that you're passionate about.
Definitely.
So I think it's a great thing for young people to do.
Yeah. So the last 4 questions we've asked to every single person who's spoken with us, and they're just a easy way to discuss period and kind of leave off. So number 12 is, what is something that you wish you knew about menstruation growing up?
I don't know if it's about growing up. I mean, at some point I have, I had menstrual health issues. I actually had very, very severe endometriosis. And I did not actually learn about it until I just had like really severe pain, which at one point we thought could be, something else and something more dangerous. I think there's not enough advocacy and information and awareness about menstrual health issues. And especially in certain cultures, we don't talk about it. But the reality is, in those very cultures, like the South Asian culture, there is a greater occurrence of endometriosis, of PCOS. And I think it's really important that we start talking to young people about that, so that that what you're experiencing, whether it's heavy periods or it's acne or something, might actually be a medical condition that needs to be treated.
Yeah. What does the word stigma mean to you?
Stigma is anything that makes you feel bad about yourself, or about the issue itself.
Do you have any particularly entertaining life stories regarding this space?
I mean, I told you the examples of growing up in India. I mean, I definitely like the school uniform thing. I did that, Um, I think it's just, I mean, in India, it was kind of weird. Like in some ways it's celebrated, in some ways there's just such a taboo. And, I've learned as I work in this feminist space that I've given up a lot of things that I grew up with in my culture that were considered norms. And as I learned more and more and grew more and more in the feminist space, I can't say that they're ever really sat okay with me. Like I think I was always naturally rebellious that way, but I was still sort of following the rules in some ways. And slowly I've just sort of shed it. And I think the really interesting one to me is that, so we do pujas or, prayers for Diwali in my household. And for many years growing up, I always learned the household, the head of the household did it, right? And I always expected that would be my husband, and I would always wait for him to do it. And then one year, I was just like, why? So I think it's just letting go of a lot of those kind of preconceived things that we grew up with.
Definitely.
That I think has been my experience. And definitely, menstruation is one of them. Though once I came to the United States and I was living by myself, I didn't have the option to not go and cook in the kitchen.
Oh,
So
exactly.
that went out on its own.
And our final 15th question is, what are your words of wisdom?
I think especially for young people, I think it's great. Anytime I see a young person who wants to get involved in advocacy, I think it's amazing. I think this is a great issue to start with. But follow your heart. There are so many things in this world right now that need voices like yours and every young person to advocate for change, right? Whether it's from our racial inequalities to climate change to so many different things that we could be look at. So find what you're passionate about, follow it. If you don't have the skills, reach out to an organizer like me to learn the skills that you need to be a better advocate, and go for it.
Great. Thank you so much for speaking with us.